Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Deltarune Theory video. Last time, in my last Deltarune Theory I posted, which was on the Origins of Darkness Part 2, we were talking about the light world objects that each Darkner is. And because of everything in Chapter 3, specifically like in the Mantle game that Ram allows you to play, I do not think anymore that Ralsei is the Red Horned Headband, which is kind of what my running theory was before Chapter 3 and 4 came out. Which, of course, raises the question, what is Ralsei? And, after digging into it a bit, I think I might have a fairly convincing answer. Probably a more convincing answer than I feel like I've ever had before. So let me share that with you. So let's start by setting this up and say, well, how do we know Ralsei is even the same as every other Darkner? He seems special in other ways. He doesn't turn to stone, for example, and he can seem to travel throughout the Dark Worlds on a whim. I would say Chapter 3 kind of puts that to rest, because Ralsei is explaining what a Darkner is to Susie at the very beginning. And he specifically says, "Even I, the one telling you this, I too am..." Implying he is also an object, or, something else in the light world that is then turned into Ralsei in the dark world. Which means he's not just some sort of like special dark world entity, which might have been my secondary theory had that not also been deconfirmed. So, in order to sort of reverse engineer this, we have to kind of figure out what Ralsei represents, right? So, he's associated with green primarily, healing, toothpaste. Lancer does call him Toothpaste Boy, and that's part of the prophecy. And then a bunch of traits that are associated with the Dreamer family, like being a fluffy goat monster, and baking, and using fire magic. Interestingly, especially in Chapter 3 and 4, but you can kind of see it even early on, too. In Chapter 1, it's fairly strong as well. Ralsei is associated with sacrifice, like self-sacrifice more than anything, right? He is willing to take on as much pain as he can because he just doesn't have very much self-worth, it would seem. And maybe that's because he seems to be some sort of copy of Azrael, right? He looks like Azrael. His name is an anagram for Azrael. Susie even points out that he looks like Azrael, although Chris is quick to correct her and point out all the differences. So clearly there's something going on there where it's like, okay, Ralsei is Azrael, but a little different, right? So that could be why he has such a lack of self-esteem to being so self-sacrificing. But that is a hint as to what Ralsei might end up being. And we have to talk about Ram again. Honestly, I've trotted out these lines so many times at this point, but I genuinely think they are very important to understanding what's going on, at least in the early chapters of Deltarune, if not in the future. So, if you talk to Ram during Chapter 3, you can get this section of dialogue where he essentially says, "Time flies. Seems like just yesterday you and that girl had everyone here lined up. Queen on her side, king on your side, tenor in back. Oh, it was chaos, chaos. Only kids like you two would take a laptop home just to play make-believe. How is she, Chris? Are you two... Well, it's all right. Everyone changes except us." And of course we know that king and queen inexplicably knew each other, despite their dark worlds being, worlds apart, you could say. Ram here is referencing Jevil, who is surely a character that Ram never would have been able to meet because Ram comes from the computer lab, not the unused classroom. However, this kind of explains it. We already know that Darkners get some of their history from when they were light world objects. So, the idea that Chris and this girl, whoever it would be, Noelle or Des probably, were playing with these objects and assigned them some sort of personality or relationship with each other, that could explain this sort of retroactive history that we see play out in the early Dark Worlds of Deltarune. Which of course brings up the question, right? If a character like Ram, especially, can turn into sort of a unique plug boy, because the little pink plug boys in Chapter 2 all generally look the same, right? Which would imply to me that that is sort of the standard base manifestation of the Plug Boys based on just a regular power strip. Whereas Ram is a special Plug Boy because Ram was one of these items that Chris and the girl used in this pretend game. So they imparted a bunch of connotations onto Ram that Ram wouldn't have otherwise. So Ram becomes a unique, essentially, character in the Dark World. That sounds like it could actually explain why Ralsei is so Asriel-like, because perhaps Ralsei was an object in these pretend games that Chris and this girl were playing. Because, of course, if Chris is playing this with a girl, that's not Asriel. So presumably Asriel isn't there. Whether it's Noel or Des, he's apparently not involved. At least not to the extent that Ram would bring him up, which feels like he would. So in that case, the idea that Chris might want to include Asriel in the game still as like a game piece, essentially, does make sense to me. And it's even possible that there might be a Des game piece on the other side of the board, or a Noel one, depending on who the girl was Chris was playing with. However, I do think it's actually fairly plausible that this could explain why Ralsei is so Asriel-like. But that doesn't exactly totally help us nail down the object. It just helps us nail or slim down some of these choices. So if we take out all the dreamer stuff, because that could be explained as being sort of projected onto this object during these pretend games, then all we're left with is green, healing, toothpaste, maybe being nerdy, but that could even be from Asriel, right? And self-sacrifice. And what kind of an object would that possibly be? I actually have a pretty good idea. And that idea is the green crayon. Now, this is not a new idea, but I think my take on it might allow you to believe in this slightly more than just saying, oh yeah, Ralsei's green, so surely he's the green crayon. I mean, there are certainly visual similarities, especially Ralsei's hat form, where the crayon sort of has a nub, and you can sort of see that reflected in Ralsei's hat. And then, of course, a crayon has these black lines on it, which could be reflected by Ralsei's face and feet, and then it sort of frills out at the bottom. You could kind of figure that that's supposed to be representative of the little, what the hell would you call that? Not cardboard, but, you know, the paper around the crayon that gives you its name. And if it is a green crayon, it's possible that the color could be in reference to mint. I have here the magic mint crayon. It's like a rare one, apparently. I didn't mean to do that. But mint and green go together fairly well. So that could explain why Lancer views Ralsei as a toothpaste boy. Because he's minty for that reason. And now I have a bunch of quotes from the game here, and I'm going to read them off and say how they could relate to Ralsei being a crayon. So first off, this is just explaining where the crayon is. So in the Dreamer House, there is a drawer. If you check it, the dialogue says there are crayons in the drawer. Their labels have long faded, and there's no green. So the green is missing, which means it could have ended up in the unused classroom or the closet, or, you know, Chris could have it on them if you want to believe that Chris has Ralsei on them as an item. Remember that video game you and Asriel used to play? What was it called? Super Smashing Fighters? When he was very little, he loved the green lizard from that. So, if Asriel loved the green lizard, perhaps that would explain why the green crayon was used to represent him in the game. For the young prince, we recommend the vanilla green tea. There's not much to go off besides your color. I mean, if the label on the crayon is faded, it's just a green crayon, right? There's not much to go off other than the fact that Ralsei's green. Oh no, the green spring is blocked up. Guess we'll have to squeeze Ralsei into a green smoothie. And this is once again Lancer talking about Ralsei. And, you know, if you took the green crayon and squeezed it down, I could see that as possibly being a reference to something kids might do to crayons, right? Sort of like ball them up or whatever. They are not super pliable wax if you got Crayola, but who knows, if you have a less high up brand, they could quite easily melt and be smooshed together, right? Susie says, looks kind of like the desert board when you enter the second board for Tenna Quest. And Tenna goes, what? The trees are green! Green! This is going to be important later. Just remember, trees are green, in case you didn't know. And then, now this is definitely pointing to the green crayon being somehow important. In the Dark World, in Chris's bedroom, their nightstand, it's a drawer. It's full of green crayons. And Ralsei built these rooms specifically for Chris and Susie. Like, Chris's room has all the accolades that Asriel has in the real world, right? It's supposed to be what Chris wants out of their own space. So why do they want more green crayons? Well, therapy. So, this is why I really like this idea. I'm going to read you this quote first. This comes from the Chapter 4 Egg Room. Someone seems to be making a painting of a tree. However, strangely, it seems they haven't drawn the bark yet. Now, this didn't really mean anything until I thought about this theory. Because, like, how do you draw a tree without drawing the bark, right? Well, if you're painting in only green, then perhaps it could be interpreted that you are drawing the inside of the tree and have not drawn the brown bark yet, right? Okay, so Ralsei wants to protect Susie and Chris from seeing the last prophecy, as well as knowing too much. Chris, through the Forgotten Man, is suppressing some sort of trauma by drawing a tree over it, right? Man Country, which is the Chapter 3 Egg Room, is a place representing Chris's childhood world, more or less. I think it's described by one of the people who sends you there as what the whole world used to look like before Tenna showed up. So this is Chris's interpretation of their world when they were a young child. The Forgotten Man lives here. The Forgotten Man, this is the only place it can talk. And this area is entirely green. I kind of initially interpreted that as being like, oh yeah, like an old Game Boy, right? Like before color TV or like color screens were introduced for Game Boys, it was all green. That's not like super crazy. I understand that. But it could also be in reference to this idea of this green thing being associated with Chris's trauma in some way, or their childhood in some other way. And of course, in the Chapter 4 Egg Room, we find out that Chris did some sort of art therapy. And putting this all together, especially, I should say, the fact that Ralsei is associated with Asriel, who is like Chris's pillar of support, or at least was during those days, is it possible that the reason that the green crayon is missing is because Chris used it during these therapy sessions as a child, drawing this tree with a green crayon? And so Ralsei's behavior of trying to cover up the truth to protect the Lightners is because Chris was literally instructed to cover up the truth with the object that represents Ralsei, the green crayon, in these therapy sessions. Maybe? I kind of really like it. Okay, sorry, I have one last funny piece of evidence. You know the Ralsei mannequin in Castletown? In Chapter 1, the worm is eating from a tree in the Unused Classroom Dark World. And then in Chapter 2, when you return, the worm is eating Ralsei's clothes off the mannequin, which would, of course, imply that Ralsei tastes like a tree, which could make sense if Ralsei is literally a tree, or like was used to draw the tree to cover up everything. And so the last thing, and this is sort of a prediction for the future if this ends up being true, creation. So, a crayon is a tool for children, primarily, to express themselves. It can be used to draw or color or write. The 7 Flying Aces, which exist in Man Country, the Chapter 3 Egg Room, were copied and were monochrome, but they were probably colored in with crayon, considering Chris was a child at the time. Ralsei's current trajectory as a character seems to revolve around forging his own identity, and it makes sense if he is a creative tool that he would be able to sort of recreate himself, right? And what if Ralsei is the one who will allow us to change the prophecy because he is a writing utensil? Gerson mentions in Chapter 4 that he believes Susie has the white pen of hope, possible to write over the spilling of ink that's soon to come, that being the roaring. Now, obviously, the white pen of hope, that's metaphorical. It's not a literal white pen, right? Gerson is being sort of poetic, saying there's this darkness, and the white pen of hope can pierce the darkness, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that Susie has to use a literal white pen to do it. In the prophecy, we see the second hero, the girl with hope crossed on her heart, which would be Susie if we're assuming the prophecy is correct, which I feel like is the most obvious solution, even if it might not be the right one. Susie's wielding a sword. And of course, Susie doesn't currently wield a sword. She wields an axe. However, if Ralsei is a crayon and Ralsei turned into a weapon, because he is a writing utensil, just like Wingblade, which was a feather pen, or Chris's pencil, which turned into a sword, Ralsei would turn into a sword too, right? Some sort of hope sword. And so perhaps, in a sort of metaphorical sense, Susie taking Ralsei as a weapon and creating a new future for everyone, like the next page of the story, something that happens after the prophecy, it will be metaphorically like Susie is writing it down, whereas in the Dark World, she's using the sword Ralsei to kill something, right? Or destroy something. And yeah, that's it. Although it is interesting, you know, these stickers come from a messaging service called Line. I like to use them because nobody else does, so it makes the video stand out slightly. It shows Ralsei singing Don't Forget, which is interesting because we obviously know, like, the promise in our hearts, don't forget, I'm with you in the dark. Is that maybe if Ralsei is the crayon and the crayon was used to sort of cover up the trauma from the shelter, maybe that's like more literal than we're thinking. Like, you know, the promise in our hearts is something to do with like Chris and Des and the shelter, obviously. And then don't forget, I'm with you in the dark is literally Ralsei saying like, you know, I'm your protector and I am with you always. Draw a tree over it, Chris. Just draw a tree and everything will be better. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I have one more theory based on the origins of Darkness I want to get to. It might be about Rudy, perhaps. So I hope you will look forward to that. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.